The photographer was still taking pictures when Naomi Carter found them. She had slipped away from the reception to fix her veil, walking down the corridor of the hotel toward the bridal suite, and the door was not fully closed. She pushed it open because it was her suite, registered in her name, booked 9 months earlier for the bride to use on her wedding day. The room was not empty. Her husband of 4 hours was in that room, and the woman with him was not a stranger. She was not a guest who had drunk too much champagne and made a terrible decision. She was Vivian, her older sister, her maid of honor. The woman who had helped Naomi pick the dress, who had given the toast 40 minutes earlier that made their grandfather cry, who had walked down the aisle an hour before Naomi herself had walked down it. Vivian, in the bridal suite, mucky with Marcus on Naomi's wedding day. But to understand how we got here, we have to go back to the beginning. Naomi Carter grew up in Columbus, Ohio, in a house on Claiborne Avenue that her grandfather Walter had bought in 1978, and that still smelled in some rooms like the cedar wood he had used to build the shelves in the back bedroom. Walter Carter was the kind of man that neighborhoods produce once a generation. A retired school teacher and deacon who had coached youth basketball at the church for 20 years, who brought groceries to elderly neighbors without telling anyone, and who believed, without irony or performance, that a family's most important job was to raise people who made the world slightly better than they found it. When Naomi's parents went through a separation that became permanent in 2003, it was Walter who stepped quietly into the space left behind. He did not announce it. He simply arrived, consistently, until his presence was the architecture of the family. Naomi was 7 when her parents separated. Vivian was 11. Walter became the steadiest thing in both of their lives, though what each of them did with that steadiness would turn out to be very different things. Vivian was clever in a way that Walter recognized and admired and occasionally worried about. She was charming in every room she entered, the kind of person who understood instinctively what each person in any situation wanted to hear, and who deployed this understanding with the ease of someone who had been doing it so long it had stopped feeling like effort. She went to Ohio State, studied communications, graduated with honors, and entered a career in event planning in Columbus that suited her gifts precisely. She maintained a surface warmth toward Naomi that most people found entirely convincing. Walter noticed things about Vivian that he did not share with anyone, because he was not the kind of man who said negative things about his own grandchildren. He simply watched. He had always watched Vivian carefully, and what he watched over the years had accumulated into something he kept in a private part of himself until the time came to do something about it. Naomi met Marcus Webb at a professional development event in Columbus in March of 2020. She was 28. He was 31. He worked as an operations manager for a logistics company, had a calm, methodical way of solving problems that Naomi found immediately attractive, and had the specific quality she valued most in people, which was that he said what he meant without embellishment. Their first date was a dinner that lasted 3.5 hours. Naomi called her best friend Linda from the parking lot afterward and said she thought she had just met someone she could build something with. Naomi and Marcus began dating steadily within a month and had moved into an apartment together in the Short North neighborhood of Columbus by the end of 2020. He was steady. He was present. He showed up consistently and without drama. Naomi had chosen him specifically because of these qualities, and she had been right about all of them, which made what happened later so specifically devastating. The qualities she had loved were real. They had simply been insufficient to prevent what was coming. Anna Vivian met Marcus at a family Sunday dinner in January of 2021, about 10 months into his relationship with Naomi. The dinner was at Walter's house on Claiborne Avenue, and Vivian had arrived late from a work event, still in her professional clothes, immediately filling the room with her specific warm energy. Marcus had gotten along with her easily, the way he got along with most people. The evening had been pleasant and entirely ordinary. Naomi had driven home that night feeling the warmth of having the man she loved accepted naturally into the family that mattered most to her. She would return to this specific evening many times later, looking for something she might have missed. She would not find anything because there was nothing visible to find at that stage, and the deception had not yet reached the point where anyone outside of it could see its shape. Marcus proposed to Naomi in October of 2021 in Walter's kitchen on Claiborne Avenue. This was not accidental. Naomi had told Marcus early in their relationship that the most important place in her life was her grandfather's kitchen, and Marcus had remembered and had arranged, through a quiet conversation with Walter, to propose there. Walter had been at the kitchen table drinking coffee when Naomi arrived, and she had understood what was happening before Marcus had fully gotten to one knee. She said yes before the ring was visible. Walter had cried, one of the very few times in Naomi's memory that she had seen him cry, and the sight of it had stayed with her the way certain images stay. Not because they were dramatic, but because they were completely true. Walter had held both of Naomi's hands and said something she would remember. He said, "You have always been the one who sees people clearly, Naomi. Use that." She had thought he meant it as a general life instruction. She had not yet understood that he was telling her something specific. Vivian's reaction to the engagement was warm, vocal, and generous. She organized a surprise celebration, offered immediately to help plan the wedding, and when Naomi asked her to be maid of honor 2 weeks later, she said yes with an enthusiasm that left Naomi genuinely moved. The wedding date was set for September of 2022. 11 months of planning followed, during which Vivian was present, involved, and frequently the source of the most practical suggestions. She sourced florists, compiled comparison spreadsheets, drove with Naomi to look at venues. She was, by every visible measure, exactly what a maid of honor was supposed to be. The audience at this point would have liked Vivian. They would have found her useful and warm and real. This was not an accident. It was the entire point. The first thing that felt wrong happened in June of 2022, 3 months before the wedding. Naomi came home from a Saturday morning hospital shift to find the apartment empty. This was not unusual. Marcus spent Saturday mornings at the gym, but his gym bag was in the corner of the bedroom, still packed. He had not been to the gym. He came home 2 hours later, explaining that he had run errands and grabbed the wrong bag in the morning. It was an entirely plausible explanation. Naomi accepted it. She made lunch. She did not think about it again for 3 days. And when a smaller version of the same feeling returned during a phone call, she overheard Marcus ending quickly when she walked into the living room. She noticed these things the way attentive people notice things, and then she explained them away, the way people who have decided to trust someone always do. Because she had grown up watching her parents' marriage collapse partly under the weight of mutual suspicion, and had decided consciously that she was not going to bring that pattern into her own relationship. This decision had come from wisdom and from love. It was also the specific thing the deception was depending on. Walter's health declined in the summer of 2022. He was 81. He had a heart condition his doctor had been monitoring for 2 years. In July, he was hospitalized for 4 days after a cardiac episode, and when he came home, he was weaker and required daily support. Naomi took leave from work and moved temporarily back to Claiborne Avenue. During this period, Walter had a private conversation with her that she would not fully understand until much later. He told her he had updated his will with his attorney in June. He told her where the documents were kept. He said everything he had decided was based on what he knew about his grandchildren and what he believed each of them had built. Naomi told him not to talk about wills, that he was going to be fine. He looked at her with the expression of a man who knows exactly how much time he has and intends to use it precisely. He said, "I know what I'm doing, Naomi. I've always known what I'm doing. Before we go any further, why let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos." The morning of the wedding was September 3rd, warm and clear in Columbus with the specific golden quality of an early autumn morning. Naomi had woken at 6 in the bridal suite, surrounded by the quiet activity of bridesmaids arriving with coffee, the makeup artist setting up, Vivian organizing the flowers in the timeline with focused energy. The dress went on at 10. Walter, who had been well enough to attend but was moving slowly and had been given a chair near the front, pressed both hands flat against his chest when he saw Naomi at the entrance to the ceremony space. Marcus cried at the altar. Naomi cried back. The vows were said. On the officiant pronounced them husband and wife at 11:47. The photographs were taken. The reception began, and then Naomi went to fix her veil. She stood in the open doorway of the bridal suite for what she would later describe as the longest stillness of her life. The room was not ambiguous. There was nothing in what she was seeing that had an alternative explanation. When the door opened, Marcus and Vivian moved apart, and the way they turned toward her contained the specific arrangement of guilt and calculation that appears on the faces of people who have been caught doing something they knew was wrong. Naomi did not scream. She did not collapse. She stood in the doorway of her bridal suite on her wedding day in her wedding dress, and she felt something she would spend months trying to name accurately. The closest word she found eventually was recognition, as if some part of her had known that something underneath the surface of the last year had been wrong and was now confirming it, and was simultaneously devastated and strangely, terribly calm. She did not speak. She turned around, walked back to the reception hall where 112 people were eating and talking and celebrating her marriage, and she found Linda. She said, "I need you to come with me right now." Linda looked at her face and stood immediately. In a small office near the venue entrance, Naomi told Linda what she had found in 3 sentences with the specific verbal efficiency of a nurse practitioner who has spent a decade delivering difficult information without collapsing while doing it. Linda took Naomi's hands and held them. And then she said, "What do you need right now?" Naomi thought about it for 30 seconds. Then she said, "I need to call my grandfather." Walter answered on the second ring. Naomi told him in the same 3 sentences. There was silence. Then Walter said, "Stay where you are. I'm coming." He was 81 years old with a cardiac condition, and he had just attended 4 hours of a wedding celebration, and he said he was coming, and he meant it in the specific way of a man who has always meant exactly what he said. When he arrived at the office and sat beside Naomi, he did not say it was going to be all right. He did not offer reflexive comfort. He sat with her completely and without agenda. Then, after several minutes of silence, he said something that opened the first door of the larger truth. He said, "Naomi, I need to tell you something I should have told you before today, and I am sorry that I didn't." He said that in March of 2022, 3 months after Marcus and Naomi announced their engagement, Vivian had called him and asked whether he would consider revising his estate to include Marcus as a beneficiary. She had framed it as a natural family consideration. Walter had said no and had called his attorney the following morning to ensure his documents were current. He said, "I told her no because the way she asked told me something. It told me she had a reason to want Marcus to have money that had nothing to do with family feeling." Naomi asked how long he had known. Walter said he had suspected for some time and had known since August. August, 1 month before the wedding. Naomi sat with this. She asked why he had not told her. When Walter said what he had known in August was not knowledge he could prove in a way that would have protected her, and that he had been afraid telling her would cause more pain than the wedding going forward, and that he had been wrong about this, and he knew it, and he was sorry. Then she asked what he had known in August. Walter told her that an old friend named Thomas, who managed a hotel in downtown Columbus, had mentioned seeing Vivian at the hotel with a man. The description matched Marcus. Walter had filed it quietly, as he always filed things, and had called his attorney the following Monday to finalize the changes to his will that he had begun in June. He had spent August and September setting everything in order. He had decided that if his suspicion was confirmed, it would be confirmed in its own time, and that his response needed to be already in place before that confirmation arrived. Marcus was asked by Linda to leave the venue that evening in language that was polite and absolute. He left. Vivian had disappeared from the building entirely at some point during the preceding hour through a side exit, a fact that would not have been possible without planning, which meant she had anticipated this possibility and had prepared for it, which meant the bridal suite had not been the reckless impulse it might have appeared to be. It had been a risk she had calculated and taken anyway. The question of why she had taken it on this specific day, in this specific place, would occupy Naomi for weeks before the answer arrived. Naomi retained a matrimonial attorney named Sandra Jefferson within days of the wedding. There was no joint property. When there was no commingled debt, there was a joint bank account containing $4,000 of Naomi's savings. Sandra retrieved it within 10 days. Marcus did not contest it. Sandra noted this as interesting. Vivian reached out through their mother, Diane, 2 weeks later. Diane called Naomi and began with an account of how distressed Vivian was and how she had explained there was history between her and Marcus that predated his relationship with Naomi. Naomi let her mother finish. Then she said, "Mom, did Vivian tell you when her history with Marcus started?" Diane said she had said it was before Naomi, but things were complicated. Naomi said, "Ask her if it started before or after she introduced Marcus to me." There was silence. Diane said, "What do you mean?" Naomi said, "I mean exactly what I said. Ask her." Diane called back 45 minutes later and said nothing when Naomi answered. The silence itself was the answer. Vivian had introduced Marcus to Naomi, not at a chance encounter. At the professional development event in March of 2020, where Naomi had believed she was meeting a stranger, Vivian had known Marcus for over a year. They had been involved. Something had appeared to end between them, and Vivian had engineered the introduction in a way that only Vivian fully understood the shape of. When confronted by Diane with Naomi's question, Vivian confirmed it, saying she and Marcus had dated briefly, and it had ended mutually, and she had genuinely thought Naomi and Marcus would be good together. This was the version Vivian offered, but the timeline, once Naomi examined it carefully, did not support the word mutually. The hotel visit Thomas had mentioned to Walter was not an isolated occurrence. It was the most recent visible point of something that had been continuous throughout the entire period of Marcus's relationship with Naomi. Vivian had not introduced Marcus to Naomi because she thought they would be good together. She had kept Marcus in her life through the introduction. She had kept him close, inside the family, inside the reach of the estate she had already begun calculating, while maintaining the appearance of a generous older sister and a loving maid of honor. Walter Carter died on a Thursday morning in January in his own bed on Claiborne Avenue, with Naomi beside him. He had been under hospice care for 3 weeks. On his last fully coherent day, he took Naomi's hand and said something she wrote down in a notebook afterwards so she would not lose it. He said, "The people who try to take what you've built usually do it because they haven't built anything themselves. Don't let what they did to you become the thing that stops you from building." He died the following morning before dawn, quietly. Naomi stayed in the room for a long time after. The will reading was scheduled for a Friday morning 3 weeks later at the offices of Gerald Park, Walter's attorney of over 20 years. Naomi attended. Diane attended. Vivian arrived 10 minutes late wearing a dark coat, her expression composed and appropriate. There was a suspended stillness in the room when Vivian sat down and she and Naomi occupied the same space for the first time since the wedding day. And they did not speak. They did not make eye contact. Gerald Park opened the proceedings with the quiet of a man who understood that what he was about to read had weight. Walter's estate consisted of the house on Claiborne Avenue, assessed at $340,000, a savings account containing $68,000, an investment portfolio worth approximately $90,000. The total estate value was approximately $500,000. Gerald Park read the distribution clause. The house on Claiborne Avenue, in its entirety, was left to Naomi Carter. The savings account, in its entirety, was left to Naomi Carter. The investment portfolio was to be divided equally between Naomi Carter and a charitable fund in the name of Walter's late wife, to be administered by Naomi. The personal contents of the house at Naomi's discretion, with the exception of certain items left to Diane. There was no mention of Vivian. Vivian's expression shifted in a way that everyone in the room registered independently. She said with a controlled evenness that cost her visible effort, "There must be a mistake." Gerald Park said there was no mistake. Walter had revised his estate planning documents on 3 separate occasions in the preceding year, most recently in November, and the distribution as written was deliberate and final. Vivian asked if there was a letter. Gerald Park produced it, a sealed envelope addressed to Vivian in Walter's handwriting. He handed it across the table. The room was completely silent as she opened it. When she finished reading, she folded it, placed it inside her coat, went and left the room without speaking. Naomi would never read the full contents of that letter. What Gerald Park told her afterward, in the matter-of-fact language of a man summarizing a legal document, was that Walter had attached an explanatory note to the main body of the will describing his observations of Vivian's character over many years. He described specifically the call in March of 2022, which he had understood immediately as something other than a family sentiment. The note was 3 pages long, written in August, after Thomas's visit on the porch. Walter had described in the clear language of a man who had spent 30 years as a teacher what he believed Vivian had done, what he believed she had intended to do, and why he had decided that what he had built over a lifetime would go to the grandchild who understood what building meant, not to the one who had spent her life calculating how to benefit from what others built. The divorce was finalized in April. Marcus did not contest anything. Sandra described his cooperation as the cooperation of a man who has understood, somewhat belatedly, that he is not in a position to contest anything. Naomi signed the final documents on a Tuesday morning and drove home to Claiborne Avenue, where she was now living full-time. She sat in Walter's kitchen and made herself a cup of tea and looked at the cedar shelves. She had been in this kitchen her whole life. She had learned to cook here. She had cried here at 4 a.m. the night of her wedding. The kitchen was hers now. The house was hers. And the first substantial thing she had ever legally owned was the place where she had learned everything that mattered. Vivian moved to Cincinnati within 6 weeks of the will reading. Marcus and Vivian's situation resolved itself the way situations built on deception tend to resolve. They did not stay together. Naomi learned this through Linda, who heard through a mutual acquaintance the following fall. She received the information with the specific calm of someone who is no longer surprised by the consequences of a story that has already shown her its full shape. She did not feel satisfied exactly. She felt something quieter, the specific feeling of watching a thing resolve into its own truth without requiring her to do anything about it. Naomi spent the year after Walter's death doing what he had asked her to do. She returned to work at the hospital in the spring. She began repainting the rooms on Claiborne Avenue, not as a symbolic act, but as the practical expression of a woman reclaiming a space and filling it with colors she actually chose. She planted the garden Walter had tended for 30 years, learning the names of things he grew. She had coffee with Linda every Thursday. She called her mother on Sundays. She was 30 years old and she had a house and a job she was good at, and the accumulated understanding of someone who has been through something that most people do not survive with their character intact. She had survived with her character entirely intact. This was, when she thought about it clearly, the most valuable thing she owned. No will, no document, no legal settlement could transfer it, and no one had taken it from her. Walter Carter had known what he was doing. He had said this himself on the worst night of Naomi's life, and she had not fully understood it then. She understood it now. He had watched his grandchildren for 60 years. He had watched Vivian, and he had watched Naomi, and he had understood with the clarity of someone who has spent a lifetime in the business of human character that one of them was building something and the other was looking for ways to inherit what someone else had built. He had responded to this understanding with his whole life's work, and he had given it to the one he trusted to carry it forward. Not as a punishment of Vivian, as an accurate assessment of both of them. This is the thing that takes the longest to understand about people like Walter. They are not moved by anger, and they are not driven by revenge. They are moved by precision. They see clearly, they act accordingly, and they trust that the truth, given time and the right conditions, will arrange itself into the shape it was always meant to take. There is a particular kind of betrayal that only family can deliver, one that uses your own love as its instrument. Vivian had known Naomi her whole life, and she had used that knowledge precisely. She had known what Naomi trusted and what Naomi valued and what Naomi was willing to extend grace toward, and she had constructed a deception inside those specific qualities. This is what makes family betrayal different from any other kind. It could not have been carried out by someone who did not know you completely. The very closeness that should have been the safety was the mechanism of the harm. And yet what Naomi carried out of it was not the harm. What she carried out was Claiborne Avenue and cedar shelves, and a garden she was learning to tend, and the slow, clear understanding that the life she was building now was built on ground she could actually see. Walter had told her she was the one who saw people clearly. She had spent a year learning that he was right. The people who try to take your life are counting on you not to notice. The moment you see it completely, the theft is already over, and everything that grows after that belongs entirely to you.